There are games you remember playing for hours without stopping. And then there are games you remember switching off almost immediately, not because they were bad, not because they were broken, but because they felt overwhelming in a way you weren't prepared for. For a lot of players in the early 1990s, that game was Doom. Before Doom arrived, gaming had a certain rhythm to it. Bright colours, clear objectives, friendly melodies looping in the background. Even difficult games felt structured in a familiar way. You knew the rules. You understood the tone. There was a safety to it, even when it was challenging. Doom didn't feel safe. From the very first moments, it was different. You weren't introduced gently. There wasn't a cheerful overworld theme welcoming you in. There wasn't a tutorial explaining movement or reassuring you that everything would be fine. There was a weapon in your hand. There were metal corridors around you. There was silence. And then there was noise. That contrast between silence and sudden violence is what unsettled so many people at first. Doom wasn't loud all the time. It built tension through quiet spaces, long stretches where nothing happened except the echo of your own footsteps. That quiet gave your imagination room to work. And imagination is powerful. You'd walk down a corridor, not knowing if something was around the next corner. The lighting felt dim and industrial. The textures were harsh. The world didn't feel colourful or playful. It felt mechanical and hostile. Then a door would open, an enemy would appear, the music would surge, and the calm would disappear instantly. For younger players especially, that rhythm was intense. The speed of movement was faster than most console games at the time. The enemies were aggressive. The sound design felt heavy and relentless. You weren't hopping across platforms collecting coins. You weren't solving bright puzzles with cheerful sound effects. You were alone, moving quickly through a place that didn't feel welcoming. And that feeling was enough to make some players reach for the power button. Turning it off didn't mean you hated it. It meant you weren't ready. Doom didn't ease players into its world. It didn't soften its edges. It didn't try to be charming. It was uncompromising. And that uncompromising tone felt like a line being crossed. Not necessarily morally, but emotionally. This didn't feel like a toy. It felt like something older, something more serious. Parents noticed it too. Doom wasn't just another release quietly sitting on a shelf. It became part of wider conversations. It was discussed in ways other games weren't. That alone made it feel significant. When a game becomes controversial, it stops being just entertainment. It becomes symbolic. For some households, Doom was restricted, forbidden, something whispered about rather than openly played. And that added to its mystique. Even players who only experienced the first level remember it clearly. The layout of rooms, the sudden ambushes, the rhythm of combat. Because Doom wasn't designed around story or cinematic spectacle. It was designed around feeling, speed, pressure, isolation. It removed the comforting elements that many games relied on. There were no friendly characters guiding you forward, no bright hub worlds, no reassuring music, just corridors, enemies, and momentum. The music deserves attention too. It wasn't melodic in a comforting way. It drove you forward. It pushed rather than supported. It made standing still feel wrong. Movement was survival. And once you began to understand that rhythm, something shifted. Because here's what's fascinating about Doom. The very things that overwhelmed players at first are the same things that make it brilliant when revisited later. Time changes perspective. When you return to Doom years later, The speed that once felt chaotic feels fluid. The enemies that once felt unfair feel predictable. The corridors that once seemed confusing reveal deliberate design. Doom isn't random, it's precise. The level layouts are interconnected in clever ways. Secrets are hidden with intention. Enemy placement tests awareness rather than reaction alone. What felt overwhelming becomes empowering once you understand it. But that understanding rarely happens in the first session. The first session is shock, and shock leaves a mark. There's also something uniquely personal about early PC gaming, sitting at a desk instead of on a sofa, the glow of a monitor in a darker room, the hum of a computer tower nearby. Doom feels tied to that environment. It doesn't feel like a shared living room experience in the same way console games often were. It feels solitary, private, almost secret. And that secrecy intensified its atmosphere. You weren't always sure you were supposed to be playing it, which made playing it feel important. Looking back now, Doom's visuals are simpler than memory suggests. The textures are flat, the enemies are pixelated, the environments are blocky by modern standards. But the design still holds, the pacing still works, the tension still exists. Because Doom's strength was never in graphical realism, it was in rhythm. It understood the power of anticipation, the moment before opening a door, the split second of silence before enemies roar to life. It didn't rely on scripted horror. It relied on player psychology, and psychology doesn't age as quickly as graphics. That's why Doom remains so influential. Not just because it helped define the first-person shooter genre, but because it demonstrated that games could evoke intensity without hand-holding. It trusted players to adapt. It didn't explain everything. It didn't comfort. It presented a world and asked, "Are you willing to move forward?" Some players said no, at least at first, and that's okay. Because sometimes the game that gets turned off immediately is the one that stays with you the longest. Unfinished experiences linger. They sit in your memory. They challenge you quietly. And often, you return to them later, older and more prepared. When that happens with Doom, something remarkable occurs. The fear shifts into control. The overwhelming speed becomes mastery. The hostility becomes familiarity. And you realize that the game wasn't trying to scare you away. It was trying to test you. Doom didn't change itself. You changed. And that's what makes it powerful. It marks a moment in time when games stopped feeling entirely safe and started feeling demanding. It showed that intensity could be sustained through design rather than spectacle. It proved that silence could be as effective as sound. And it demonstrated that sometimes discomfort is part of growth. Because turning a game off doesn't mean rejecting it. It can mean you weren't ready yet. And when you come back, when you're older and steadier and more confident, the experience feels different, not smaller, just clearer. Doom wasn't the game that everyone played endlessly on day one. For many, it was the game they approached cautiously, the game they turned off, the game they remembered. And in the long run, that might be even more powerful, because some games entertain you, some games impress you, and some games challenge you before you even understand why. Doom did all three. But first, it overwhelmed you. And sometimes, that's exactly what makes a game unforgettable.
Level up inside.